The phrase "the kingdom of God" would certainly have confused many Jews. They were waiting for a mighty warrior and a leader who would break the shackles of the Roman Empire and would proclaim an eternal kingdom of righteousness, obviously with them taking central stage. The next few parables, starting with the friends of the bridegroom, is the first of 5 parables, all reflecting that a division would take place between Judaism and Christianity.
According to Mark's account, Jesus had also appointed Levi, who was also known as Matthew, as one of his disciples. Now Matthew was a tax collector who was responsible for collecting taxes on behalf of Rome. As tax collectors, they were despised and were considered to be outcasts and traitors amongst the Jewish elite. The religious authorities of priests, Pharisees, scribes, and Sadducees collectively shunned tax collectors by declaring them to be unclean. Tax collectors were also barred from attending synagogues and were refused the right to testify in a Jewish court. It was simply a national disgrace for a religious leader to associate with a tax collector. The scribes and Pharisees had apparently witnessed the selection of Matthew at the tax booth and had followed Jesus and his 5 disciples to Matthew's house. They would have not dared enter the house, as by their own definition they would be rendered unclean. So they remained outside observing the activities which occurred within its walls. They would have been appalled at what they observed. Firstly, the food was not prepared properly, and secondly, there was no formal protocol around the table, let alone the company with which Jesus dined. According to both Mark and Luke, the Jewish religious elite were looking for grounds to declare Jesus as a heretic. Shortly after this incident, the religious authorities openly confronted Jesus with the accusation that both he and his disciples failed to observe the Jewish laws of fasting. According to the laws of Moses, Jews were compelled to fast 1 day a year on the Day of Atonement. The purpose of this day was for the nation of Israel to mourn and humble themselves over the sins which they had committed against God. While many other fasts are mentioned throughout the Old Testament, including fasts associated with grief, for prophetic insights over sin or those seeking communion with God, all the others were done on a voluntary basis. But the Pharisees had added their own traditions to the laws of God during this period. It was considered mandatory for Jews to fast twice a week, usually on a Monday and on a Thursday. Of course, Jesus, although a professed Jew, was not prepared to follow Judaism's self-imposed laws and regulations. Jesus had been quizzed by the Pharisees and scribes as to why he and his disciples refused to fast while every other religious Jew complied. The question posed was, how is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? They were very unhappy that Jesus was not conforming to the Jewish community. We are a little bit surprised to read about John the Baptist's disciples joining the attacks against Jesus, especially since John the Baptist pointed to Jesus as the Messiah when he was baptized. Then again, it is possible that many of his own disciples were not present when Jesus arrived to be baptized. When John the Baptist was arrested, it is more likely that his own disciples associated more with the customs and views of the Pharisees and the scribes. There are also signs in the Gospel of John that John's disciples were jealous of the growing popularity of both Jesus and his disciples, and probably the reason for the challenge. The friends of the bridegroom.
And Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast."
So Jesus answered the question using the traditional symbolism of a Jewish wedding to illustrate his point. There are only 2 elements in this parable: the bridegroom, and the friends of the bridegroom, which are commonly referred to as groomsmen. In this rhetorical question, can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? He identified himself as the bridegroom and his disciples as the groomsmen, or as the attendants of the bridegroom. This was not without purpose, as according to rabbinical rules, Jews were traditionally forbidden to fast during wedding ceremonies. In his response, he was indicating that there were no reasons for his disciples to fast, as he was still with them. While the Old Testament never directly associates the Messiah in fulfilling the role of a bridegroom, since Israel was often referred to as the bride of the Lord, it would not take a clever Jew to perceive that Jesus was referring to himself as the Messiah. This would have angered the religious authorities even further, as they had already decided in their hearts to reject the ministry of Jesus. Jesus further predicted that a time would come where he would be taken away, prophesying a violent removal of himself, resulting in his own disciples having to fast. In its simplicity, the parable not only teaches the separate and unique nature of Jesus' ministry in his life, but also prophesies differences between Judaism and Christianity upon his death. His disciples would fast in the dark days of the future, as recorded in the book of Acts, but his presence with them precluded them from following any Jewish self-imposed rituals, which were not given by God.
There are 4 further parables which describe how the split between Judaism and Christianity would actually occur. Join us next time when we continue our deep dive into understanding the parables that Jesus taught. Until then, Maranatha.